We're live.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Inside Movies Galore, where we are continuing our themed month of movies that are accidentally scary. But let's take you over to our host who needs to quit smoking before he comes on, but tell us what movie we have in store for the audience tonight.
I was talking like this before we got on. I don't know why. But yes, hello, boys and girls. So tonight's movie is The Secret of Nim from 1982. Don Bluth's directorial debut after having left Disney. He was a ex-Disney animator on films such as The Rescuers, which you can definitely see in the character designs in this film, but it is a stunningly beautiful animated film from 1982, a fantasy film that got a lot of critical acclaim, but sadly was not a box office success because it came out in the same summer as Poltergeist and especially E.T., which E.T. eclipsed everything that year. So, unfortunately, it didn't have a fighting chance, but now it is regarded as being quite the cult classic and I think one of the best animated films that's not from Disney. And it really is an astounding piece of work. And indeed, it has a lot of moments that are quite scary for younger viewers, but I think it also challenges young viewers at the same time with its themes and with its animation. But we'll get into that as we go. So, why doesn't Tammy start us off? What were your first impressions of this film? Was this a first time watch? All that good stuff.
It was the first time for me. I thought the storyline was very unique, and the different um, creatures that you'll, as we get into it, that will come up. I thought that it was, how they brought them all in here, and you know, normally, like rats and mice don't get along, or birds and mice, but I thought it was unique how the friendships that were made and everything, and um, things like that.
Very good. Forrest, what about you?
Okay, so this is my first time watching it since I was about maybe 8 or 9 years old. Um, I think this is really well. This was a very well done. I definitely agree. This is definitely one of the best non-Disney Western animated, actually American animated films. Uh, and it's the animation's really well done, extremely well done. Uh, Actually, I have to say, Bluth's credit, he really stepped up to the plate during Disney's dark age, both with Disney and after he left Disney. Um, but I think the animation is terrific. It's a lot of great dark visuals. Actually, although I was looking at the voice cast of this movie because I had forgotten who was in this, and I was kind of pretty surprised. I mean, you have Will Wheaton and Shannon Doherty in early roles. And then Dom DeLuise. This was his first voice acting role. And if you look at his filmography after this, he did a lot of voice work from here on out.
And a lot with Don Bluth too.
Well, yeah, and I remember watching other Don Bluth movies or Oliver and Company, which was Disney, and I could recognize I recognize his voice. I would recognize his voice right away.
And he even
yeah.
returned for the sequel.
Don,
Yeah, straight to video sequel, which I've never seen. I'm not in a hurry to watch.
no, I've seen a review of it, and I was like, "This looks like utter dog shit." So no thanks.
I mean, if it's a straight to
Yeah,
video
pretty
sequel,
much.
that's a red flag. If it's straight to video, that's a red flag right there.
Well, not necessarily. There have been like a select few that even Disney films, like they're not necessarily like amazing, but there are some that are pretty darn good, but most of them not so much.
Right. But yeah, I think this is. I mean, yeah, I think this is. But yeah, I mean, I hadn't seen this movie in about 25 years, give or take. I thought, and just really thought just like visually and thematically a very dark but beautiful movie.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to dive into when it comes to the darkness and the themes and all that stuff, which I am sure that Brandon probably picked up on, considering that NIM is an acronym for the National Institute of Mental Health. So, Brandon, what do you have to say about this film?
Well, I have not run afoul a lot of animal experimentation in my field, but that's a different field. Neuropsychology and therapy definitely are two different branches, and I sucked at neuropsychology in school, so. But this is definitely not my first time. I mean, I've watched this film a lot. I liked it as a kid. It was creepy. I mean, but for some reason, I took to the animation and was not scared by it, which is one of those odd cases where I wasn't scared by something that other people were a little bit freaked out by. And just the animation style is really unique. Don Bluth is a unique artist, and his work is just spectacular to watch. From films like American Tail to this, to I believe he did the Lord of the Rings movie, didn't he?
That was Ralph Bakshi.
Ralph
Yeah.
Bakshi. I mix up some of that, but any case, so Bluth was an amazing child's artist. Would wonder what it would be like in the hands of having a fully animated horror film. That would have been a very neat experience. But to me, I love the theming. I just love the art design of this, especially the rat's home, the different contraptions. Just as a kid, this was a playground of the mind, I would like to think.
Absolutely.
And I've read the source material. I like the movie better than the source material.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say that I understood later that it was based on a book that I'd never read, but I would like to. So we'll have to dive into some of those similarities and differences. But Dave, I don't. Did you see this as a kid?
I did see it as a kid. In fact, I remember watching this fondly. Thing is, as an adult, coming back to it, I forgot how heavy the material was, the source material was for this. You know, I wasn't thinking of that when I was a kid. I was just, following the story of this whole like underworld of mouse venture. uh, and I liked it. I mean, as I continued as a child, I ended up liking anything that Don Bluth actually did. I mean, he went on to do All Dogs Go to Heaven and things of that nature, So to me, I feel like this was definitely a darker film at moments, but it had a lightheartedness about it, and I did like the characters, and I enjoyed it, and I was entertained again seeing it years later. Although it's been a while since I've visited it, so it's a good return, and it's more of a nostalgic thing to watch that. And then, of course, I watched the direct-to-video sequel afterwards because I'd never seen it. Even though I heard many bad things about it, I still wanted to give it a chance. But yeah,
it wasn't too terrible. I watched it too for the first time for this as well. It wasn't too terrible, but it was very Saturday morning cartoonish.
they went more like Broadway musical style. But other than that, yeah, I think it's a good starter film for if you have kids to start them out on that for sure. But that's my view.
Cool. Mo, was this a first time watch for you?
Oh no, I grew up on this movie hard. It's one that I probably watch usually about once a year, sometimes more. And it's just fantastic, dude. This was always right there, like neck and neck with Dark Crystal for me as far as like dark fantasy for kids goes. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, animated or otherwise, for sure. Everything about it to me is kind of damn near perfect, from the voice cast to the music to the general tone of the movie, the animation, the overall story. It's just an epic film, and it was interesting to see it kind of develop that cult status, I guess. It used to be kind of a movie I thought I was in the minority of people that liked, and then later on, it kind of narrowly missed being that sort of flagship property for emo goth kids in the early 2000s there, when Hot Topic was really pushing NIMH merch for a little bit right alongside the Nightmare Before Christmas stuff. Nightmare Before Christmas.
I don't remember that era of Hot Topic at all. I remember Nightmare Before Christmas merch, but not NIMH merch.
That would have been
think
awesome.
That's the way it was for most people, dude. I think for NIMH, they basically just had, your standard shirt and poster combo type thing, or several shirts and posters rather. And
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they attempted to kind of push it right there alongside the Nightmare Before Christmas stuff. And Nightmare obviously beat it out and became like the symbol of, early 2000s goth kids, and then later the whole emo scene adopted it, and it's still kind of going to this day, and that's cool. But I mean, it was like, it definitely put the movie out there, I think, in front of a newer generation of kids and people that maybe missed it, and that definitely helped, because it's fairly well known now comparatively.
Yeah, it definitely has gotten a second life, I think, largely thanks to the internet. But I see Jake is back.
I am indeed.
First time watch for you?
Well, and apologies for being a bit late. Work late on Tuesdays, and but this one actually, I have a weird follow through to this, which is the one I grew up on. Don Bluth films. I grew up on American Tail. I'm almost certain the second movie I saw in theaters was The Land Before Time, and I definitely grew up on that shit. And I am certain that I saw All Dogs Go to Heaven in theaters. And when high school came around and Anastasia came out, and I was a big fan of that one.
They're watching,
and
I've
seen all of
that, dude. My brother
actually, I watched Anastasia
it
again a couple weeks ago. Actually,
yeah, I caught the beginning of it before we got in here, and I think I'm gonna borrow his Blu-ray and watch it later on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Right. It's just a cool coincidence.
No, you just reminded me that I need to double check and make sure that wasn't something we skipped last night. But I think that was actually this month. Okay, so, but anyway, so I've always been aware of this film, but for whatever reason, I never got around to it. I don't know why. I just never got around to it, and so I was certainly glad to finally have an excuse to see it, to have to see it, if you will, and an excuse to get it in the collection. And Dane, I ordered the Blu-ray before you gave us your very harsh opinion on said Blu-ray.
Yeah, that
But
transfer is the worst Blu-ray transfer I think I've
it's
ever
pretty
seen.
bad. It's pretty
It,
bad. I've seen a
it's
couple that were bad.
it's
Like
shameful.
I still say the transfer for Robin Hood Prince of Thieves was pretty shameful, at least the edition I had. There have been a couple that were, but for a first time viewing, I guess it's no worse than watching a really old DVD transfer. I mean, so for first time viewing, it wasn't too bad. I would like to see the show properly cleaned up at some point. And I mean, heck, what we really need probably is a really solid Don Bluth, like 4K Blu-ray upgrade, like all of the big, titles. Might be pretty cool. And I also am very happy that I got to visit this and Anastasia shortly before we'll see a film that shamelessly apes all the Don Bluth stuff. I know Brandon knows what I'm talking about. I don't know if he's led on to everyone else yet, but it's it's coming. But I generally liked it. I had heard the film's reputation for being unusually dark, and I had heard its reputation for being well, obviously this month we're doing accidentally scary or whatever. I was impressed to see characters actually the blood drawn. I was impressed to see that in an American animated production. And there were a couple of things that were pretty dark and interesting. And Jeremy, I think, was the crow, I was like, oh god, that's the prototype for Tiger right there. I mean, that's but it was a fun one. I'm glad I finally saw it. And I did not spring for the sequel this time. I've only seen a few of the sequels of the various Don Bluth films, and almost without exception, they're not much worth watching. But I never did watch Five Goes West, so I need to remedy that.
That's a huge exception to the general
Probably the
rule.
best of the
Right.
sequels.
Now,
Yeah, it might be
the
the
two
best.
after them were kind of but
I think Five Goes West and Rescuers
Right.
Down Under are probably my favorite animated sequels.
The Rescuers Down Under was great, and actually, it was interesting to learn that Don Bluth was an animator on The Rescuers, and I actually had not realized he was that most of these people came from Disney, and from what I understand, there was some bad blood there for a few years. It's kind of
I can't remember the details, but there was quite the exodus from Disney in the early '80s. There, of not even just Don Bluth and his crew, but like quite a few people went
there's a good reason for that. I mean, I'll get into that just a little bit here because there is a good reason for that because Walt Disney died in, I think it was 67.
66.
60. Well, I thought it was the Jungle Book. Or no,
Jungle
sorry,
Book-
that
Jungle
came
Book
out like just
posthumously.
yeah, you're right. But yeah, 66 Jungle Book came out, then in 67, and then the subsequent Disney films from like the uh all throughout the 70s were basically ideas that Walt had considered and were in various stages before he died, and so it was basically Disney just trying as a company just trying to buy time and to figure out what would Disney have done, what would Walt have done, and I know that that's not really a sustainable way to run a company
right.
long term, and the whole company was in chaos for quite some time, and there was a leadership shakeup in the 80s. That's when Michael Eisner got brought on, and that kind of stuff. And Jeffrey Katzenberg, and it was a big change up. But during the interim of all that, there was that big talent exodus, and Don Bluth was one of them. You look at the character designs for this film, and you can really, really tell that he worked on The Rescuers because the designs of these rodents are very similar to the mice. Rodents meaning
Right.
mice and rats. because you have both in here. Very similar to the mice designs in the Rescuers. And even the humans, you can tell that there's a carryover as well. Um, but for my first impression, I had actually never heard of this film until I had watched the Nostalgia Critics Top 11 Underrated Nostalgic Classics video, where I got introduced to a lot of like 80s films that I'd never heard of. Because, see, I was a mid 90s and 90s and 2000s kid. Um, and so there was a lot of stuff that I, didn't fall on my radar unless it was a major classic. But that's the same video where I first heard about Return to Oz and, other things that I've subsequently come to love. And one of them, his number one pick in that video, was this film. And, I just looking at the visuals of it, I was like, oh, wow, this looks like a serious piece of work, like in a good way. Like, really well done piece of animation. It looks dark. It looks well animated. A well realized world, all that kind of stuff. And then I finally saw the film. I want to say roughly college age, maybe a little bit after. Pretty sure in college though. And I loved it. I really did. I thought it was very challenging for kids. It was a pretty mature story, but not so much that kids couldn't handle it. It definitely harkened back to the golden age of Disney animation, like Snow White, Pinocchio, like that kind of era, which I know that Don Bluth takes a lot of inspiration from. Like he's a big fan of like the early days of Walt Disney animation, and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I just love the themes of the story. I love the fact that it doesn't sugarcoat things for kids. It doesn't sugarcoat the fact that life is harsh and that it's full of danger, but that it's about overcoming those things. That's ultimately what matters. I believe that Don Bluth had a philosophy that you can throw kind of anything you want at kids as long as you give them a happy ending afterwards, which is probably a halfway decent rule of thumb for children's entertainment. And I'll take that over light and fluffy and meaningless, like Minions or something. Um, but it's just nice to see a film like this, and especially one that deals with a lot of heavy subject matter. So, speaking of which, some of the themes that this story covers, we've got, and again, this theme slash content, I should say, because we've got, Mrs. Brisby, who is a widow. She's a mouse who is a widow. Her husband, Jonathan Brisby, who everyone talks about and seems to really revere as a hero. He was killed, but we don't exactly know how for a good portion of the movie. And she's just a single mother trying to raise her children, one of whom has pneumonia. And so the whole quest of the film is to, Timmy is sick, moving day is upon us. Moving day meaning, there's a tractor that's going to plow up the land on which their home is built. They live in a cinder block. Um, and, moving day is upon us, but Timmy can't be moved because of his pneumonia. What do we do? That's the main conflict that gets the story going. And from there, we get the Great Owl, who is this truly frightening figure. You get
Yeah, he is.
intelligent rats, and why they're intelligent will be revealed as we go. You got a cat named Dragon, who's a very scary cat, as far as animated cats are concerned. And you've got political intrigue, you've got magic, you've got betrayal, you've got murder, you've got animal experimentation, for kids.
You got Nicodemus's enormous mustache. He would have been a good
Yeah.
contender for mustache.
Oh, he would
Might
have
be
been
one of the best ever.
Yeah,
he would have been the winner.
Nicodemus is like the Splinter of the rats,
Yeah,
he's a lot better than Splinter because he's got magic.
Right.
I'd liken him more to Gandalf, but yeah.
Yeah,
he's Splinter / Gandalf.
Yeah, really. But and the plot's pretty simple. It's very well paced. And you have your lovable supporting characters with Jeremy the clumsy crow, voiced by Dom DeLuise, who is the comic relief of the story, but does prove his usefulness many times. And then of course Auntie Shrew is a shrew who kind of looks out for the other animals on the farm. And she is always, yeah, you have films like this. There is always an older woman like this who is not amused at the ruffians, that sort of thing.
And sounds vaguely like Angela Lansbury.
Yeah, even though it's not, it's Hermione Badley. But
Quite vaguely.
but she even is not just a stick in the mud. She's actually very capable, and she does mean well, like Mrs. Brisby says. But you've got that, but you've also got a little bit of political intrigue with our villain Jenner versus Nicodemus, the wise and wizard-like rat, and of course our dashing hero. What is his name? Justin. Yes, Justin. So we've got quite the cast of characters there. But the most important character of which, without whom the movie would not be possible, is Mrs. Brisby herself. She's really the heart and soul of the film, and I think probably one of the best female protagonists in children's animated film history, because she's very unassuming. She's just a mother who's overwhelmed by the responsibility of having to raise children alone. And she doesn't think of herself as especially brave, and yet she is very, very brave. She does a lot of things that I don't even think that she thought she could do. And yet she doesn't hesitate to do them. In fact, in some cases, she volunteers. What do we think of Mrs. Brisby as a character?
Well, I would say she does show a lot of hesitation at the beginning, but as it goes on, she definitely comes into her own a lot more.
I think that's actually a good thing too, though, because when you because a lot of times many female protagonists are considered strong female protagonists because they're perfect, and that a female protagonist can't be strong unless she's perfect from the very start.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, she isn't perfect. She had to find a lot of her courage to do that, and she had to utilize her deep caring for her family.
Mm-hmm.
That is a huge portion.
Which, just random little fun bit of trivia, is that two of her kids are voiced by Will Wheaton and Shannon Doherty in their respective film debuts.
Yep.
So that's kind of fun. And then on the flip side of it, okay, I hadn't caught this, or I would have said it in my intro, but Miss Brisby herself is voiced by Elizabethhartman in her final film role. Unfortunately, she apparently committed suicide a few years after this film. But her first film role was A Patch of Blue, which I watched the other night in tribute to the passing of the great Sidney Poitier. The two of them co-starred in that film. So I accidentally got the beginning and end of her career almost back to back. And I'm like, that's a fun and happy accident in some ways. But I think her performance is quite excellent in the character. Overall, the vocal acting, I think, was pretty solid in this film. They do have a really impressive vocal cast. And yeah, but again, her as a character, I agree with Brandon. A lot of times they feel the need to make the female protagonist a little too what do they call it, a Mary Sue or whatever it is? Is that the term?
Yeah.
And I would say she doesn't really fall into that trap. When she comes into her own, I guess it kind of feels a little more what's the word?
Earned.
Adventurous.
What's that?
Earned.
Adventurous.
Okay, yeah, I think earned is the word I was looking for. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
See,
I mean,
I
you could
saw
compare her
her
to like Ripley from Alien. Actually, Forrest's thing there is kind of, she's more in that line of where she's not necessarily this ultra perfect kick-ass heroine or
Lucky
whatever.
hero.
She just kind of deals with the situation as it comes, and the more she deals with the situation, the more capable she becomes as like a protagonist. You know?
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of mothers will tell you that, like mothers that aren't like, violent people or whatever will say things like, anyone comes between me and my kid, and that they would lash out and that kind of stuff. So in other words, the threat of family is a powerful motivator, and in this case, the threat of family is able to make her go on the great adventure and the great
Mhm.
journey in a way that she didn't think she could.
Actually, another really cool in my mind tends to latch onto these things, and forgive me, but there are two other ways in which I just can't help now that I've started connecting this to A Patch of Blue. This is an animated film that's extraordinarily colorful versus a black and white film. But the other thing is the mothers. She is the central mother role here. And she's, as we said, fiercely protective, cares so much about her family. That's the entire thrust of the film. Versus her character in the other film, her mother was played by Shelley Winters, and Winters won an Oscar for playing one of the worst mothers in movie history. That woman was an atrocious monster. And in the way she treats her daughter. So it's kind of cool to see that extreme disparity of the way mothers can be portrayed in those two films there.
Well, not to mention that I think what makes Mrs. Brisby work so well as a character is that Elizabethhartman's performance. It doesn't really feel like a standard voiceover performance. You know how like American voiceover work and also like especially anime dubbing, how this was pre Aladdin, before like superstars voiced everything in American animated films. But like, generally speaking, in the voiceover world, you do see a certain type of delivery, a certain type of especially people that aren't necessarily used to it. You can kind of tell that they're either reading their lines or they're in a booth or they're, not quite sure what, emotion to deliver or to give it if they're not used to it. What's so nice about her performance in here is that it doesn't really feel like your standard voiceover performance. It really feels like she's understanding the full scope of the emotion of what she's going through, and her intonations, her timing is not standard a standard delivery. It just really feels like she's there in the moment. So that's a really, really positive thing.
It's especially impressive. I watched the commentary with Don Bluth and I think it was Jerry. It was Gary Goldman, might have been the other one that was doing the. I can't remember, but it was two of the big people behind it, Bluth and Goldman, I think. But they were talking about how most of the characters in the film delivered their lines solo, like they were in a sound booth reading the scripts. They weren't in a room together. They weren't acting off of each other. And I know for a long time that was kind of standard. I think more nowadays they tend to do more kind of together.
If they can, yeah.
Yeah, but definitely that's all the more impressive to be able to give a actual performance on your own.
Oh yeah.
And I would say as well, though, this cast, I wouldn't exactly slight this cast overall in terms of overall importance. I mean, Nicodemus is Derek Jacobi. You got Dom DeLuise was already a pretty big name at this time.
Mhm.
You got Peter Strauss in there, Arthur Mallet, John Carradine. You had a pretty impressive cast.
Oh yeah, well, but you know what I mean though. Like Aladdin came
Right,
on, and that was like the watershed where every animated film needed to have an
right,
all-star celebrity cast, and then the there were a lot of voice actors in animation that weren't necessarily household names already. But again, you do occasionally see those ones that pop up, or like I'm thinking of like Kenneth Mars, who was well known for in like Mel Brooks films and things like that, but he was actually the voice of King Triton in The Little Mermaid before Aladdin came out. So occasionally you would get some of those crossovers, but it wasn't as common as it is today, or like as much of a selling point.
right.
But yeah,
Well,
I
actually, if
actually
I'm remembering correctly, the same year as Little Mermaid, but wasn't Burt Reynolds the star of All Dogs Go to Heaven? Am I remembering that
yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
that was correct. Which
Okay.
perfect casting there. But yeah, Derek Jacobi, he actually this was I mean, I think he was well known in his own right, but I'm thinking like he was a Shakespearean actor because he was in Kenneth Branagh's Henry V and his version of Hamlet as well. But those all came
Right.
later, which is pretty cool. I don't think he was even all that old or anything, and yet he's playing this very elderly character. Um, but yeah, I mean that we have to establish the character of Mrs. Brisby, because without her, we don't have a movie, because she is the protagonist and she's the glue that ultimately ties everything together. Um, but
Tammy,
yeah,
from a female perspective, what did you think of Mrs. Brisby?
I thought that she would, like everybody's been saying, where she, as a mother, she was doing her best to protect her children, and she rose to each occasion as to what she had to do. She didn't come off as a big heroine, but when push come to shove, she was there. She did what she had to do. She was very likable. She seemed very sweet, but like everybody said, she was gonna do whatever she did to protect her children.
absolutely. And she what I love about her is that she is the reluctant hero, but she also yeah, her bravery very clearly it grows over time, and she isn't perfect, but she really does grow as a character and really is an inspirational character for a lot of people. Um, and then she's of course juxtaposed with Jeremy, who's this clumsy crow, and
Mhm.
of course Don Bluth giving it his all. And he always played this type of character in Don Bluth films like Tiger, the cat in. I actually, it's funny. I've never seen the original American Tail, but I saw Five Goes West growing up, and I loved it.
Oh, you never
Um,
saw the original.
no,
Huh.
for that was a rare instance
It's a
where
classic.
I saw the sequel first, but I loved it. But it's I got I got the basic gist of it. But like he played characters like that quite a lot in the films that he was in, and
Mm-hmm.
but what I liked about him in this role is that, like, as generally speaking, a lot of animators will design, especially these days, they'll design an animated character off of the voice actor, or they'll use the voice actor as a reference. Sometimes they're very different though, because like the Jonathan Freeman who voiced Jafar doesn't look remotely like Jafar, not even a little bit.
Mhm.
And then like Dom DeLuise here, they didn't design Jeremy after him at all.
Mm.
But I found that kind of refreshing because it's different from say Tiger, who is a
It
bit
does
more,
look like it.
yeah, a bit more rotund. The face is similarly shaped. It's like, oh yeah, I can see that. But then with Jeremy, it's like, no, they don't look at all alike. But what do we think of Jeremy as the comic relief?
Oh well, I always thought that he was a great start for Dom DeLuise's career for voice acting. I always loved Dom DeLuise. I like him in his work in the '70s, um, just as a comedian, and I think this was a perfect character. He can be annoying at times, but many of the comic reliefs can be. But I don't think it overstays its welcome, and a lot of times you feel more sorry for him than you feel annoyed.
Right.
See, as far as Dom DeLuise goes, I kept hearing Itchy's voice from All Dogs Go to Heaven in my mind when I saw The Crow. So every time I heard his voice, it kind of reminded me of Itchy, and just how bumbly and clumsy both characters were, you know. And that's just the kind of character that I think he ends up playing in animated features. And I thought for this particular feature, to play the comic relief of the film, I thought that he added what was just and right for the feature to bring some of that comedy into the whole with how dark the film can go, at times.
You needed that character in there.
Yeah, I mean, without like him and Mrs. Shrew and the kids providing some chuckles throughout it, I think the movie might even feel a bit too uptight and like serious,
too dour.
Yeah, it might be kind of a bummer if those elements weren't in there. And Dom DeLuise definitely has his whole shtick, but he did it very, very well. So I've never found myself complaining about hearing his voice in something, because it's like, oh, it's Dom. He's got like that fun, goofy uncle vibe, and I dig it.
Well, and also you'll notice in the story he pops up kind of at a key moment where they need comic relief. Like, he doesn't overstay his welcome, and it's usually once something really heavy happens, then that's usually when they pop him in, just because it's a good change of pace. So he's used effectively, as is and Auntie Shrew is not entirely a comic relief character, but certainly
but her chemistry with the kids brings some funny moments,
Oh yeah, definitely.
When I was a kid, I always was hoping that she would just do the typical thing. Well, I never, something like that. Like they always seem to do with that type of character.
I know. Well, she's one of my favorite characters in the whole thing, because I really do have a soft spot for those characters who talk like this, who do not get the joke and do not have patience for those ruffians. They talk like that.
And she's not a bad character at all. She's actually quite a good character. It's just that she's got that way about her.
She's the one. She's the one who came and rescued Mrs. Brisby from the tractor. And,
where Brisby
later on.
Where Brisby tried to be bold and brave and to stop the tractor, and then she kind of, I guess maybe her fear of heights maybe is why she kind of choked, and then the other Auntie Shrew came along and did the job and then brought her back, but then so that was like, I guess, like I said, kind of the early she kind of started one way, and then as time went on, changed a little bit. The one other thing I wanted to mention, and maybe I've forgotten it. Dang it! I was going to try and say one more thing about Jeremy. Oh yeah! In the commentary, they were talking about how Jeremy was originally slated to only show up in a couple of scenes, but they really liked what he did for the movie, so they wrote a couple more for him. So I think that is a kind of a good example of what we were just talking about. That's what I was trying to follow up with what we were saying with that they had apparently been thinking along the same lines of, hey, this guy really does cut the tension a little bit. Let's give him another scene or two.
Yeah, and
Well, I
obviously that.
I like the idea a lot of. I mean, I wouldn't say to Mrs. Brisby that Jeremy's her best friend, but in his mind, they're best friends, you know. And I just like the
Right.
idea of like this crow that's decided, like, I really like this mouse, and she's my girl.
Well, they have a
Right.
great dynamic because you know, she is without a husband and she's trying to deal with a sick child and also with raising these children on her own. And then he's a clumsy oaf who can't attract another lady crow. Um, and you know, so they make kind of an unlikely pair because he's getting advice from her, and you know, he's able to help her out also in his own way because he can fly and you know that sort of thing. So they definitely make a good kind of a good group of friends there, good allies. And I do find it really funny when because she wants to tell him that he's really annoying, but and you know all that stuff, but she's too polite for that. But then she's
Well,
like,
and
if
then she bats her eyes and like
yeah,
she kind of like hits on him for a moment. I need a man
well,
around the house.
that's what's great about her is that she's able to use her feminine wiles when she needs to in order to make sure that her kids are safe and everything, which I found that very funny because she plays to that part of him that wants to be a hero and everything. But you know, that being said, you know, it does help to lay the groundwork for him eventually finding a lady crow who is just as clumsy and awkward as he is, because I guess that's just a crow thing. Um,
Mhm.
which fun fact, the whole like, I've always wanted a sparkly of my very own. You know, that whole thing.
Mhm.
Apparently crows really do like shiny
Oh
things.
Yeah,
yeah.
dude.
Which
Oh
They'll take.
yeah.
They're
Yeah.
I
known to take them, and then they're also known to give gifts to humans that they take a liking to and stuff as well. And you know, Jeremy being a crow and being the comic relief is kind of accurate to real life because crows have a lot of personality
yeah,
and can
which
be pretty funny.
and I didn't know that. But I'm glad I know that now because that does add an extra dimension to his character. Um, and I mean the kids are just kind of they're just kind of there. Although I will point out that how fitting is it that Will Wheaton makes his acting debut as this impetuous youth, and then he plays the
Mhm.
impetuous Wesley Crusher on Next Generation.
Right.
I
Foreshadowing.
actually did get a kick out of the older of the mice children because he was so, what is it, um tough, on
And
like to Mrs.
Headstrong.
Shrew,
and the
headstrong.
terrible things that they do to him in the second film.
Oh jeez.
Oh, talking about Mr. Aegis.
You're
Mr.
talking
Aegis
about
was fun.
the older brother, the
Oh, sorry, Martin.
Martin.
Yeah,
Martin. Yeah,
yeah, that's what I was saying with Will Wheaton there. But
Yeah, the
actually,
kids are just kind of there though for the most part. I mean, I
yeah,
Yeah.
think
and
any
they're
other
kids.
anybody else doing this might have rooted the movie in a kid. And I think it's great that they don't do that with Secret of Nim. You know, it's the kids are kind of in their own little peril, but the story focuses on Mrs. Brisby and the larger events instead of making it specifically a film for kids. They do that with the
Right.
second one, and obviously didn't have the same results. You know.
yeah.
Well,
Well,
like this
there-
one,
there's
other
a.
than,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry.
No, you go
Well, I
ahead.
was going to say, other than Timmy, who's sick, and so you know, we talk about Timmy, but we don't want to look at Timmy. The other kids, the the other kids, kind of fit a stock archetype like that you see, like Peter Pan, for example. You have the older daughter, the impetuous middle brother, and then the young one who's like the cute one, or the,
Yeah,
you know, and that's a common archetype you see again and again in animated films. And
yeah,
I feel like they all fit those to a T. So yeah, it's, you know, I wouldn't say that any one of them really stole the show for me, but as a unit, they do their part.
we have Timmy, but we don't look at Timmy.
Yeah, he's only Tiny Tim in another generation, you know?
Basically, yeah.
That's
and
how you create Grandpa Joes, dude, where they end up like pretending to be bedridden for years after they get better and spring out of that son of a bitch when you get the golden ticket.
Yeah, the way you said that, that just killed me.
Yeah, that was great.
That was really funny. But we have Mr. Aegis there, who is a very, very crotchety mouse. Very much the kind of surly inventor type, who
Right.
is very reluctantly helpful to Mrs. Brisby all the way through. But obviously he knows a lot more than he lets on. Um, his is a very good vocal performance, I think.
Yep. Arthur
Arthur
Mallet.
Mallet,
Yeah.
yeah.
hmm
What do we think of him?
He's
I
like
thought
he's fun.
he's
Like you said, that kind of he's like really busy, really busy with his own work. He can't really be bothered, and yet he's still reluctantly, like you said, reluctantly he does what he needs to do to help out. Complaining the whole time, but
Hmm.
in a way
That's
he reminds me of like the Bilbo Baggins of the group because on the outside
Yeah,
of
I can
his
see that.
Yeah.
on the outside of his home is like go away
Yeah.
no unwelcome visitors or something like that.
right.
So to me that kind of reminded me of like seeing the little bit of a hobbit hole.
one in his character design in particular. You can really see the Rescuers' influence. Um, I think that him and Mrs. Brisby both, but especially him. Like you can really see that the Rescuers came first.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, he's a good character. And then of course we've got our rats. We've got Nicodemus, who has probably the best mustache of all time, who is kind of your stock wizard figure. There's not too terribly much that makes him all that special from that stock character, but Derek Jacobi does do a good job of voicing him, I think.
Well,
And he's
his
just
character design is great too, with the
oh, I
glowing
know.
eyes and like
Oh
the
yeah.
gross fingers and stuff. Like he,
Right.
definitely doesn't look like the first wizard you'd want to go consult just because he is pretty fucking creepy looking.
Actually, in the commentary, they commented on his hands. They're like, those aren't really rat hands. We're not sure what those are. Or something like that. I was
Yeah.
just kind of amused by that.
Well,
They
now
just look like skeletal hands, you know.
I know. Well, now you notice this could be kind of just a character design thing, or it could be intentional. But one thing I noticed was that between Nicodemus and the Great Owl, they both have the glowing eyes. They have the super long mustaches and the ginormously bushy eyebrows. So I kind of wondered if that was a sign of their
Oh,
magic.
it was intentional.
Well, who's to say that the Great Owl isn't Nicodemus's familiar?
Well, that or like I kind of took it to mean that they were like powerful with magic, or they were mystical of some
Yeah,
way.
ancient and powerful kind
Yeah,
of beings of this world.
yeah. But their designs are unforgettable to look at.
Oh, for
He-
sure.
and he's also got the warty talons in the same way that Nicodemus's fingers are very full of warts as well. So it's just an interesting observation. So there's clearly
Indeed.
Oh yeah.
at least a thematic tie, if not a literal tie. And even Nicodemus mentions that the Great Owl is an ally. So um, yeah, I just took that to mean that he was kind of magical in his own right. Um, which I mean, we might as well talk about the Great Owl. He's a very fearsome figure, but he's
Yeah,
also
terrifying.
yeah, well, but he's
Well,
also, I kind of interpreted him to not be like good or bad. He's just a fearsome figure because kind of like what the Wizard of Oz was supposed to be if he actually had magical powers.
Yeah.
But like that kind of, the great and terrible as he's referred to in the book, like
The
that kind of fearsome figure. Go ahead.
the whole introduction to the great owl, where you've got that owl and you have the spider coming up behind her, and then the owl just crushes it.
Mhm.
It is a I don't know about the rest of y'all, but the way that spider was drawn, it just left me going, leaves shivers up a
Oh
child's
yeah.
spine looking at that thing with the mouth, like the mandibles going at it. And
Well, he's just this looming figure, and the talons are like bigger than like any child size head, and to me, he was gigantor of an owl as a kid, and I could see how that particular scene can make a child a little bit fearful because that sense of maybe I shouldn't be here is in Mrs. Brisby's footsteps,
Plus all the animal skeletons all around.
Yeah,
oh
his
yeah,
lair is gnarly.
owls
Plus,
Look
eat
at the
mice. I mean, she said it
bones.
herself.
yeah, well,
She said it herself. Owls eat mice.
and that's what's great about him as a character is that they make no bones about the fact that he is a meat eater and he easily could eat her, and probably has eaten a lot of mice in the past. So he's a fearsome figure for sure, but he's also obviously wise and is not all terrible because he's an ally of the rats and everything. But I just that's kind of refreshing that he's a fearsome, kind of source of knowledge that is able to. He's only in the one scene, but he has a lot of his appearance has a lot of weight. And John Carradine, he gives the role a lot of weight also because John Carradine wasn't always in the best of movies, especially like in the 60s and 70s and that kind of stuff. But it's like here he's
And
really
later in
getting it.
his life, when they were propping him up like a weekend at Bernie's or something, that was
Yeah. But here
terrible.
he's really giving it his all here, just in the one scene, so that's really awesome.
Yeah, it's great. And you're onto
I
something,
like
dude. I think with
I
the owl, when you're that massive of a mystical beast that's ancient and been around in this forest or whatever for ages, like you don't really have any skin in the game of these mice. So you're definitely correct in that he's not really a villainous character. He is just fearsome in that way that if he decided he wanted to just eat this mouse, he could.
Mm-hmm. Well,
What are
I
you gonna say,
like the
Tammy?
owl. I like the owl a lot. I think I like his whole setup. It was dark foreboding and Miss Bit, Miss how do you say it,
this is
Bisbee?
Brisby.
Brisby. She, as she got further and further, she's like, you can tell she's like, I don't think I should be here, you know. But she keeps going on and on because she was told to talk to the owl. But yes, he is a very, very presence. His presence is, you know, shows that he is something magnificent. And that's when she does get to meet him, she realizes that you know she was sent to the right person or the right
Hmm.
owl.
Well, and also the fact that he is so great and terrible, that when he tells her to do something, it carries weight not just for her but for the rats. That plus her name, carries a lot of weight. So, that's a great thing.
And just getting
Um,
Mr. Ages' reaction. The owl?
oh, I
You
know.
say you met with the owl?
With that big close up on his mousy face. Um, and then with the actual rats, one thing I have to say about the film is like, I mean, some of the characters are really interesting and well developed, like Mrs. Brisby. Some of them are pretty stock. And yeah, like Jenner as a villain is really, really stock, as is Justin as the kind of dashing Errol Flynn type. And it's mostly
You
because
know,
they're only introduced in the last half, in the second half of the film,
Yeah, but
and
they don't
you know,
have to be for a children's movie.
I know,
it's
but
fun. It's funny that you mentioned Errol Flynn because I
Mhm.
was getting kind of a Robin Hoodie type vibe from
Oh
Justin
yeah.
and a Sherwood of Nottingham Forest from Jenner.
Well, and
Certainly.
also, I believe it was in the commentary that the sword fight sequence was pretty much ripped from old Robin Hood,
Yeah,
like Adventures of Robin Hood or whatever.
it would make
Yeah.
sense, and I mean, the '80s as a decade had a lot of '50s influence because of like all the remakes of monster movies that occurred in the '80s, but then also because I've talked about this before, how there's a lot of every decade there's always a 30-year nostalgia cycle for remakes and references and stuff, but then you also get like the 50-year retrospectives. That's a separate cycle, and in the '80s, the 50-year retrospective was the '30s, and so it's no surprise why that would have been on their minds as well. Um, but I do feel like they as characters are a little bit stock. It only really feels that way because they are introduced in the second half, and
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of fine that they're sort of basic because they're just generally like cogs in the overall story arc of
yeah,
Miss Brisby, you know. Everybody that needs to be fleshed out, what for a kids movie or not, is pretty fleshed out
yeah,
in
I
sequel
agree with
movies.
you. That's what makes it excusable,
Yeah.
because the rest of it is so good and they all fit their roles really nicely that it's not a big deal. But it's just an observation. But again, wicked eyebrows on Jenner as a villain, and he's got quite the cape action, so he knows how to use the villain cape.
Could have more
Um,
of a mustache though,
that
you
is
know.
true. That is true. And but despite
They
him,
did give him the villain goatee.
they did.
I think when
I
you're hanging around Nicodemus, you don't want to step to that game, so you just shave your mustache,
I
right?
was gonna say,
What's the
don't,
point?
don't even try. You're never gonna win that one. I'm afraid.
I do
Uh,
like how he plays the political game,
yeah.
and you can tell there's a lot more depth to the character than they can display there, at least for the time being. But
Yeah, I mean, they all have their history. If they really wanted to knock out a banger of a sequel, they should have done a prequel as the sequel and told, obviously Jonathan's whole story and everything like that and done it more to the quality they did this one. But,
Yeah.
some alternate universe versions of us got that and they loved it. Sorry, Brandon, what were you saying?
no, that was the idea. Is basically, I think that I mean, there's obviously you can tell there's more in the background. And yeah, a lot of us would like to see more if they had gotten like an extra comic series or something like that, something where they could take their time letting us get to know the characters.
Well, and funny you should say that because I looked this up before we got on. Apparently, uh, as of 2015, there was supposed to be a live action CGI remake of the film,
Oh, gross.
but
Gross.
that one doesn't. That was
Ew.
2015. It hasn't really. Nothing has come to fruition. But then it also says a television series adaptation is in development by the Fox Corporation, which because I perhaps that would mean that it could get on Disney Plus but I know that the rights for this film are through United Artists, and that's MGM, and Amazon
Amazon.
now owns MGM, so who knows? It could be Disney Plus, could be Amazon, who knows? If it even happens, I don't know if it will. But wouldn't that be interesting? And I imagine that this world could be really expanded upon really nicely with a TV
Oh,
series.
yeah. That's the way to
Which
go.
and I mean that's more or less the characters really, as far as I can remember. But I mean the plot is pretty straightforward. I already outlined a good chunk of it. The only real thing that really, so a couple things. So it is for us humans, it's a small scale story because it's just animals on a farm, but because it's shrunken down to their level, it feels like a grand epic adventure, and so it's able to do a lot of those larger fantasy adventure tropes, but it's on a small scale, but it feels large
And
for
we
them.
see it from the animals' point of view
Yeah.
because the humans are portrayed like those that we see in The Lady and the Tramp,
Oh
where
yeah.
you just see the backsides or the feet of the woman of the
Well,
house.
you see faces, but they're de-emphasized though, and they're not really important. It is from the animals' perspectives, but because the world is shrunken down, something that would be small for us is large for them. Um, but yeah, we get a lot of those kinds of fantasy tropes as far as like um, the the backgrounds have a fantasy feel to them. Everybody's dress is pretty timeless, really. It feels not really of any one specific time or the other, which is really nice. Um, and But the big element, beyond just kind of Timmy's sick, how do we move him before moving day? The big element that really makes this story what it is are the rats of Nim themselves, because they started off just as ordinary rats, but then the National Institute for Mental Health, or NIM, who we don't really get to know all that much about, other than just it's a government institute that was conducting animal experiments. That they were conducting experiments on, I think they said 12 rats and 12 mice. They got a series of injections, and we don't know with what, but it was obviously enough to not only make them intelligent, but to give them a connection to either an ability to use magic, or a connection to a realm of science that we don't know, that looks like magic, or who knows what. It's left intentionally vague, and that's part of the mystique of the film, is that we're not really sure if the injections made them able to use magic, or if it, whatever it did. But they're basically able to have kind of wizard tropes and stuff in a way that has something of a scientific basis, but it's kept vague enough to be mysterious, just like the rats themselves. And one thing that we also notice about the actual procedure that they went through is that whatever the scientists injected the rats and the mice with, apparently it slowed the aging process, and that's why Jonathan Brisby didn't tell Mrs. Brisby about it, because as she grew older, he would have remained younger. And so, what that leads us to believe is that the rats and Mr. Aegis are probably far older than even we know. Um, so if it really slowed the aging process, then who knows how old they really are. Nicodemus, we can assume, is really, really old. That was just an interesting observation. So on top of being intelligent and able to use electricity, and able to use what we can assume to be magic, and these other elements
Do
that. Go ahead.
Do you think it's possible that Mr. Brisby actually is alive?
No.
Because I got I got the distinct impression that maybe, just maybe, because of the whole aging process thing, that maybe he didn't tell her of his aging process and just went off. And
No, I don't think he would do that. From
okay,
He
everything
was
that they
a
that I have to say, for like for a character that we only see briefly in a flashback, they talk about him so much. It's kind
Yeah,
of unbelievable.
I don't think he did the whole
like
going out for a pack of smokes and never coming back.
No, they really put him up on a pedestal.
Yeah, he's pretty revered.
Yeah.
okay,
One thing that is
because
important to go ahead, Dave.
because I thought for a moment that maybe they just let him like go out to like go off field because he didn't want to tell Mrs. Brisby that that he was still young,
Hey, man, that's how you get Queen on the soundtrack. You know, listen to when she's all old.
I mean, well, I mean, keep in mind she's still relatively young at the time of his death, so that would not have been the time he would have vacated. It'd have been maybe along the time of the second movie if he was going to do that stuff.
Well, but I just find that interesting that for a character that we only briefly see, they talk about him a lot.
Yeah, they do a good job of cementing that he was like this hero amongst them in a lot of ways. You know, somebody people looked up to and revered. Obviously, one thing that's interesting to take note of that sort of can, in certain ways, fill in some of the information about the experiment that we're not explicitly told in the film or possibly the book. I don't know. I've never read it, but it's pretty much inspired by a real experiment. It was called the Mouse Utopia experiment. There's a pretty good little mini doc on YouTube about it. That's how I learned that it was like, holy shit, that was real. They weren't injecting them with like serums as far as I know, but it was basically they built this huge like mouse city pretty much and filled it with a bunch of these mice. And I think the whole idea of it was to observe their behavior and see what would happen with like that many, living things together in one place if you started limiting the food, for example. And it was a horror show, it sounds like. Absolute horror show. So I imagine if they were injecting those mice with some type of, intelligence serum, they would have staged a very similar escape and gotten as far away from people as they could,
Well, we
kind of a plague dogs thing,
Well, we humans have done a bang up job of experimenting on ourselves in one way or another. Like I'm thinking of the Stanford prison experiment and the syphilis experiment and Nazi prisoner and concentration camp experiments. It's like, we do a bang up job of doing that on ourselves, let alone animal testing and stuff like that.
I think the real life NIMH was going on kind of as almost a, simultaneous thing to some of those, like maybe the Stanford one or those people that were given LSD to dolphins. But I always thought that was like interesting since learning about it. But from what I understand, the author of the book somehow became aware of this or like maybe even visited the place. And then that kind of, loosely inspired the story. Another thing that I find really interesting is that apparently in like 1972, I think it was, the rights for the book were offered to Disney and they passed. And then the next year, they snapped up the rights for the Black Cauldron and just sat on them for like a decade. Now, while, the box office numbers show that maybe not a lot of the general public took notice of NIMH at the time, Disney certainly did, because within like 2 years after this, I think we got Black Cauldron, which is arguably Disney's darkest film that they've done.
Yeah.
And the poster is almost a 1-for-1 rep of the poster design for Secret of NIMH, which I've always thought was pretty funny.
And
like they're not even hiding it. It's just right there.
And the Black Cauldron came out in the same year as Return to Oz in live a also by Disney. So it was their attempt to try to do dark fantasy on a couple different fronts. Which
and don't get me wrong, Black Cauldron is fantastic. I love it. But...
Yeah, I like it too. I acknowledge it's very flawed, but I think it's a good attempt on Disney's part to try to do dark fantasy in an animated form and to try to make like a more horrific film and stuff like that. Same with Return to Oz, except I think Return to Oz hangs together.
I almost feel like the Black Cauldron was like a first draft to the Sword and the Stone. Well,
no, the Sword and the Stone is based on Arthurian legend, and that's a lot
I know,
older.
But I still feel like it was like a pre-stage development before they actually made that film.
Which it wasn't at all, because the Prydain books are far newer than Arthurian legend. Plus, the pre-production process for Black Cauldron was 2 decades after Sword in the Stone, because that was when Walt Disney was still alive. But it's it's still a medieval setting and everything,
I
but
could totally see how there's some of that DNA from Sword in the Stone in Black
Mhm.
Cauldron, just in the way Disney did it, if that's what you mean.
well, and actually
I
Yeah.
could see some of that. Yeah.
the character designs are perhaps at least somewhat inspired from that era of Disney. But yeah, the Sword in the Stone definitely came first.
This movie had a huge influence too on one of my favorite comic book series ever, and that's Mouse Guard, which also has a tabletop role playing game for it and all that stuff. And it's
And I
basically like if this leaned even harder into the medieval fantasy kind of, vibes.
and I almost wonder if Brian Jaquez, the author, actually kind of got some of his medieval
Yeah.
mouse.
There's something like red. I can't think of the name.
Well,
Oh,
the what's nice about the costumes, or sorry, the outfits that the animals have, is that it's not really. I mean, it's set in what looks like fairly contemporary times, but like their outfits are not really tied to any one style or any one time period or anything like that. So that's a really good touch because it makes it more timeless. Um,
well, I think what they did was a lot of the rats and so on, they learned about stuff and they all decided to adopt what they thought looked cool.
Yeah. Well, and obviously they're more steeped in their clothing perhaps looks a little bit more classical high fantasy, but like with Mrs. Brisby, all she's got on is a cape and that could be any time. And the
Yeah, it
kids,
could be like you said,
Right.
contemporary too when it's said, or you could look at it as a fantasy thing.
yeah.
Uh, it does a good job of riding that line between the two to keep it pretty timeless, like you said. I think of all the nostalgia movies that we've watched and reviewed on here, Nim is a good example of one that doesn't necessarily rely as much on the nostalgia. Like several people here, it was their first time watching it and they liked it. Uh, and I think a lot of that is owed to it not feeling super, super dated. The animation is good enough, the voice acting is good enough, and just everyone's character design and stuff like that, keeps it from feeling like it's just some artifact of the 80s.
Oh yeah, that's a great thing about it is that you could watch this alongside like a 50s Disney movie, a 60s one, a 70s one, an 80s one, or any, it fits alongside those very nicely, and it's a little hard to tell when it was made, which is a good thing. But yeah,
Uh,
the basic gist of the thing, spoilers, is that well, after they become intelligent and are able to use magic or whatever it is, which they never explain, which is perfectly fine. But the whole gist of the thing is, do they move on? Do the rats move on to a place called Thorn Valley, or do they remain in the rose bush stealing the electricity from the farmer? And that's like the big issue that the rats debate back and forth.
I love that energy
Nicodemus,
hijacking. It's so great.
well, and Nicodemus wants to move to Thorn Valley because we know too much, and they want to become more than just rats and more than just thieves. Whereas Jenner's like, we're sitting pretty, we should stay where we are, even
we're
though
living high on the hog.
yeah, even though Nim is going to come and destroy the rose bush and thus destroy them, but he doesn't want to listen, of course. Um, but it's with the rats agree to help Mrs. Brisby move her home, except that Jenner devises a means by which the house will fall on Nicodemus and kill him, so that he can seize power. And that actually succeeds. It's important to notice that Nicodemus, wise though he is not clairvoyant. So that's a very important thing to make clear.
Hmm.
But it succeeds, and of course, it's Justin, our dashing hero, realizes right away that it was he who did it, and they have a back and forth sword fight in which Jenner kills his right hand man who refused to cut the ropes, which draws some blood in this G-rated film, which I was pleased to see. We have quite a lot of character death in this film.
Hmm.
We had in the flashback they mentioned that almost all of the mice were killed, and then we have blood drawn from the sword there. On behalf of Jenner, we've got some sword fighting in which some more blood is drawn. We have Jenner getting a dagger in the back from his not quite dead right hand man. And Nicodemus, of course, gets squashed, and none of it is too terribly graphic, but still, it's like
We
Cumulatively.
we
yeah.
forget to mention this amulet.
Oh, I'm getting
Uh,
there because Nicodemus gave that to Mrs. Brisby, which apparently Jonathan Brisby wanted her to have. Which it's I don't think it's ever officially named either. It's just an amulet that has powers that are not really explained, but it's the idea that courage unlocks the power of whatever it is, and
I
Mrs.
feel like that's
Brisby.
another piece of that Hot Topic merch that they had was that amulet.
I'm sure, but yeah, for her, her courage reaches a point where her children are about to sink in the mud when the house, the cinder block falls into the mud, and her courage is able to kind of do what Yoda did with raising the X-wing out of the swamp. She's able to.
Yeah,
Except I have to say hers was far more impressive because she has the fire coming out of her, and it's quite something to behold.
it's
But that
funny you mentioned the X-wing because I was thinking the exact same thing. It's like Luke, use the
yeah,
Force.
yeah, it is that same kind of thing, except hers is a lot flashier, and it's funny because like there's definitely religious symbolism in Don Bluth's work, especially with like all dogs go to heaven. But then like I couldn't help but think like with this one, you saw like the rays coming off of her. It almost reminded me of some paintings of like the Virgin Mary and you know the the main kind of I could imagine in my head I'm hearing like a Sunday school person of like if you have faith as small as a mustard seed and you can raise the X-wing out of the swamp, but in this case it's a lot more than that. It's courage specifically, but it's raising the cinder block out of the mud, and it's a very powerful scene, very emotional, very the music swells.
Draining.
Yeah, and very draining for her because that's a lot of power being coursed through her all at one time, uh, and but that's well, and the music swells in a beautiful way, which we'll talk about Jerry Goldsmith's score in this,
Oh
and
yeah.
we have our sweet little epilogue where Timmy still can't come out because he's still sick, but he's not that sick. Um, and of course, our dear Jeremy, he meets a lady crow who is just as clumsy as he is, and we can assume that they're going to make a lot of crow babies. But I mean, that's the super super fast version of the plot in a nutshell. But I think the most important things to digest in this thing are really the themes of the thing, and there's a lot to dive into as far as because we've got science, we've got magic
Mhm.
of sorts, we've got a lot of elements that are just not explained, but deliberately so because it's the idea. I think the idea is that the world around us is a wondrous place. That it's full of elements that we don't yet comprehend, but that by having faith and courage and all these noble virtues that we can get through the worst that life has to throw at us. I don't know if anyone got that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It seems pretty obvious that that's kind of what they're going for with it, and it's not done in like a sappy way that makes you feel like this is some after school special shit. It's like
Nah.
it's woven into the tone of the movie well enough that it just feels like a general underlying message, which is nice.
Oh yeah, and it's just a good. Even if this were done with humans and it was in a fantasy, like a proper fantasy setting that wasn't, a farm in our world, the story would still work. It could totally work in high fantasy. It just
Oh
happens to
yeah,
have
then
charm because it's animals.
well, and it's the juxtaposition of that against like the real human world that's clearly going on the peripherals of this mouse world that seems massive because they're mice and rats, but it really isn't. That's kind of one thing I always liked about Secret of NIMH is you could imagine, like, wouldn't that be cool if there was like some high fantasy mouse shit going on in the field over there? You know,
Uh-huh.
like some epic sprawling story that we have no way of having like a glimpse into because our world is totally different, you know.
Yeah. Well, and also you notice
A
that
rodent-sized Game of Thrones.
or
Yeah.
the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, because I mean the fact
Right.
that Mrs. Brisby's got her cape and she's got this amulet, which is a little bit like the One Ring, you know,
The
that
precious.
magical object that she's been chosen to carry. You know, and also the cat is named Dragon, so I mean, you know, that
Right.
automatically gives us a pretty good tie to fantasy.
And
Mhm.
that cat, I mean, the design on that cat, which I think he perfected his scary designs
Mhm.
when he went on
Mhm.
to do the, what was it, American Tail with the
Right.
Russian cats. I mean, good God, those
Oh
things
yeah.
are creepy. I mean, I was quite surprised by it.
Oh
Mhm.
well, Ash and Erebus like
The,
that cat.
the mouse of Minsk.
Right.
Well, but I think it's
There are
really
no cats in America.
yeah,
And the streets are made of cheese.
yeah.
Indeed.
But let's think. I think, but you're right. I think that the themes are woven into the narrative very nicely, and it's not particularly preachy or anything. I think it actually respects the intelligence of kids in a way that a lot of films don't. You know, it trusts that kids will be swept up in the fantasy and in the kind of magic of the whole thing. And it's a pretty simple, straightforward story. Just it's done well, you know. It has
Indeed.
the right kind of blend of tones and everything. I think the fact that they rooted it so heavily in like golden age Disney for inspiration, I think that that probably helped because golden age Disney in particular, like I'm thinking of like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, not a complicated story at all, but just simple and pure and done really, really well. It's undiluted, you know, or and uncomplicated, you know,
And the art really does help tell the story.
that too. Which
And think.
we should talk about the art because the art really
Mhm.
is what sells the thing. And the first thing to touch on is the fact that for almost the whole movie, it's shot either at sunrise or sunset. It's got that kind of overcast, or not overcast. It's got that kind of magic hour, orange skies kind of look. But it can often look beautiful, but it often looks very foreboding. And then if it's not outright set at night, as it is in the climax, then once everything is all right with the world, you notice blue skies, you know, so that's a very, very important thing. So it visually sets the tone and it visually reinforces the emotion of the characters.
Right. Another thing that they said, and you can see my little image there of Nicodemus's glowing eyes. Uh, but there were multiple times in the film where there was some definite glowing. Like you had parts where like words were being written and there was like it looked like they were glowing off the page or they were like candlelight or whatever.
I know.
And they talked about in the commentary about how that was very rare in animation at the time and that they actually were doing some experimenting to come up with those effects. And I think overall that they did quite good with that.
I really love
And
the fact that
yeah,
Nicodemus doesn't even really have to write out the words in the way that we typically would expect him to, and yet the words appear,
right.
which I thought that was a great touch because that automatically tells us right away that we're
Oh, yeah.
dealing with someone special and someone that's beyond just a rat or even beyond a human, you know, which is pretty amazing.
Oh, I love the
I
glowing.
unfortunately have to take off, guys. I have to
Okay.
attend to some stuff with my kid, but I'll just throw my favorites out real quick. I'll
Go
let
for it.
Brandon
Okay.
do my outro. But favorite character would be Jeremy. Favorite scene is probably them just trying to lift the house and everything that comes along with that. And man, is that a tense scene too. There was a meme I saved before the conversation where it was like childhood trauma starter pack, and it had that along with like
Yeah.
the Atreyu sinking in the swamp and a couple other ones.
Yeah.
So that's pretty fun. That's my favorite scene overall. I just generally love the movie. Favorite part of this discussion was Timmy's there, but we don't like to look at him. That'll be with me for a while. And,
Put that on a t-shirt.
exactly. I'll take two. So thanks, guys. Sorry I had to bail early here, but it's
No
if I
worries.
don't do this with her,
Alright.
we're not going to be able to. So
Go for it.
take
Yeah,
care,
have fun.
and I'll see you guys soon. Yes.
Good to hear from you.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
But yeah, the visuals of this thing are pretty outstanding. With at daytime, at nighttime, in the rain, the actual lair of the rats, the way that it's illuminated, the way that the flashbacks are done, the transformation scene with the rats, like that's pretty horrific looking.
The catacombs and the rows, I mean, those are spectacular.
They are, and also just the lighting effects on that one random rat guard that swipes at Mrs. Brisby with his like electrified spear. What
Oh,
a
yeah.
great series of shots, full of mood, full of atmosphere, full of style, full of drama. You know,
Right.
like you
They
can
did-
watch it. You can watch it without the sound on, and it communicates the story visually. It's pretty amazing.
They did a really good job of another thing they talked about in the commentary was that they used a lot of like real life subjects, real life models. That's not really what I'm but anyway, you get the idea.
Oh,
Like
you mean motion reference for the
references. That's the
Yeah.
word I was looking. Yes, references. Like they pointed out one scene where like they're in a boat and they're floating, and they were talking about like they actually had a boat that they recorded, and then they went back and and animated while using the recording of the motion as a reference,
yeah.
and like different things like a basket being dropped. Mr. Aegis's lair is like deep inside of a thresher, and like they were talking about how they had actually gone down into the thresher to see what it looked like inside. Like they really did their research and their meticulous and I do think that in terms of the physicality of the world, you could call it the props, the setting, whatever, the
Detail.
but the physical, the detail of the physicality, I guess, maybe what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It is quite impressive, and it's very intriguing to see that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's a carryover from the heyday of Walt Disney animation because actually I think as early as Snow White was when they used live action reference to get the physics of the animation down, because it wasn't what made Snow White such an expensive endeavor and such a risky endeavor was A, that had not been done before in feature length, and B, most people were used to animation being very cartoony with that kind of timing, that kind of rubbery motion, all that stuff. The fact that Snow White and the dwarves and everyone, they moved a lot more like real humans would move with that kind of physics, and that technique carried throughout Walt Disney animation. It carried into these ex-Disney animators, and you can really see their work on the screen there because, like you said, the physicality is really, the characters have weight to them. They have, like, especially in the sword fight, like each swing feels like it's important, and each one carries a lot of weight. It's not, It's different from, say, like in the 50s. Actually, you had a lot of like Peter Pan in particular has a lot more like cartoon like motion and timing to the slapstick, whereas here everyone moves a lot. It's not, but it's still clearly animation in the classical sense, though. It's not rotoscoping, which is literally tracing over the live action footage, which creates a degree of correlation with the live action to where it's like, well, it's not even really animation anymore. It's kind of like what was a precursor to modern day motion capture, that same kind of thing. But no, it is worth pointing out though, because it does their hard work does show on the screen, and it makes each moment, each swing of the sword, each
Yeah.
leap, each even just gesture, each physical gesture, like especially with a character like Jenner with his cape and his gesticulations, really makes him come off the screen.
I do like even the final touches, like the end, where you've got the swaying of the two birds and it just transitioning to a solid drawing on the page.
Yeah, that's a good touch too. Um, but no, the animation is pretty stunning, and that's why it breaks my heart so much that the Blu-ray release, that only one release of it, they didn't do even like a remaster or anything. The one release they did of it looks so awful. I mean, and I watched the movie again before this show. I watched it again and just on YouTube because it was one of those ones that was on there for free with ads or whatever. Um, Looking at it there, it's like that that's a particular one that they used for streaming looks better than the Blu-ray. So they must have used a better source print or something. But it's
My
like
guess,
this
oh,
movie
one exists.
deserves that, it must, but like this movie deserves, I think, not just a remaster, but it deserves like a if ever there was an animated film that could, well, I mean they did with Watership Down, but like, the Criterion Collection should put this out, I think. I don't know if they
Oh,
will though, because like MGM owns the
yeah.
rights to it, and they've been putting out a lot of their stuff through Kino Lorber these days. But
Right.
it needs a remaster, preferably a 4K. It deserves it.
I agree.
It needs the
I
right treatment. But yeah, it's just a shame that the more widely released versions of this just look awful, because the movie is not awful at all.
It's
Um,
always possible that it'll get a 4K. I mean, I'll say this: as nasty as the mouse can be, for their properties, when they re-release them
when it
on
comes out of the
Blu-ray and
vault.
stuff, they clean that up a
Oh yeah,
lot. You can
totally.
tell the difference between editions. It is an amazing thing.
Well, maybe again with the Amazon acquisition of MGM, maybe something can be done with whatever, if they put up a 4K of this or on streaming or whatever. Something's got to be done, but because it really deserves it. So we covered off animation. Let's talk about music, because Jerry Goldsmith did the music for this, and it's probably one of his best scores that most people don't talk about, I think. It's got a great feeling of, well, adventure, but also terror and wonder and triumph when it needs to. It's a really great score. I mean, what did we all think of that?
Oh, I love the principal song. Now, the score itself is also really beautiful, but there is
Right.
something about that. It gives you feelings of warmth
Yeah.
that a feature like this should, especially with it being about motherhood, and you can feel that, and that is an amazing thing.
Totally. Well, the song
Mm.
is called "Flying Dreams," and I love that the main musical theme that is that song, and that's why, like, when she's reading over the diary entry or whatever of the Jonathan Brisby was ki- killed today. She can barely read it, and barely stomach it as she's reading it. Um, like you hear that musical motif pop up. It's the opening title theme. It's the main song that you hear when she's taking care of Timmy, and it pops up again in a triumphant fashion when she finally uses the amulet to raise the cinder block. It's just it does what musical motifs should do. It pops up at just the right emotional moments, and can be sad, it can be triumphant, it can be you know tender, all the different things that that same melody needs to do.
I
Uh,
do have to admit, though, for me, having been, I guess, spoiled by all the other Don Bluth films, I like the music a lot, but I was not blown away by it. I mean, I've always been, I've always grown up with somewhere out there, and
mhm.
yes, I do have to say, There Are No Cats in America is one of the great earworms of movie history. And then you've got the great theme from The Land Before Time, If We Hold On Together. And then Anastasia, you got Journey to the Past and Once Upon a December. I mean, with music like that, that's a high bar. And the Flying Dreams just did not hit that bar for me.
Well,
But if I watch it a few more times, I have a feeling that it will rise quite a bit. It just on that first viewing, like I said, I think I was spoiled musically by the other films.
I think for this film, the music kind of displays a mystical, almost magical feeling to the film.
Mhm.
Kind of like
Oh yeah.
a wonderment, so to speak. And yeah, it's not exactly, but it's it works for the film in its capacity that it had, and I think
Mhm.
it is very much a score that seems to kind of ride the roller coaster that this film is. It's
Whoever
kind of
used the
an
word warm, I
interesting
think that is
mesh
a
of
good one.
emotions.
And Jerry Goldsmith has experience with sci-fi and fantasy and that sort of thing because he did the score for Alien and Ghostbusters and or no, was that him or was it Elmer Bernstein? I can't remember. Well, he for sure.
Bernstein did
Yeah,
Ghostbusters,
sorry.
but Goldsmith did Rambo and Star
On,
Trek.
and I know he did Alien, and he did. Didn't he do the director's cut score for Legend? Because that was also
I believe
Tangerine Dream
so.
was the other one.
Yeah, I do
Um,
believe so.
yeah, well, but he has experience with the fantasy genre. Um, but apparently, it was his first animated score, and was a departure from his usual work, which is pretty cool. Um,
And they
and
also did say, again, on the commentary, they were very complimentary of the score. And they did say that they pointed out it was his first go at it and that he really got into it, that he really was. And I think I can't remember if it was a commentary or IMDb where I saw something like that. He had apparently did a couple of weeks extra for free just because he wanted to perfect the score. So that's a good sign if someone's putting that much effort into it.
well, and not only that, but he later did the score for Mulan, the original animated version. So he got to do
Right.
more
Yeah.
animation. Um, and then I'm trying to think what else. I mean, anything else in particular about this film? I've not seen the direct-to-video sequel, but I've heard that it's not good. But people here have said various things about that. So I leave that up to you if you want to briefly talk about that.
Well, well, Timmy
Yeah.
Timmy has kind of grown up, and he kind of goes off on an adventure of his own and he finds a female character that ends up having family that's still left in the NIMH care, and he kind of like rescues them. But in the whole mix, his brother Martin has become his alter nemesis in the whole thing, because ultimately, also it is a musical, so it's kind of, that's pretty much the gist of the movie.
And it's got Ralph Macchio singing.
Oh God!
Because we all wanted to see that.
The
Really?
animation is probably the weakest spot, because it really does. The animation was what made me think of a Saturday morning cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
It made me think of the way the Looney Tunes show is now, and it's just so not not animation. It's computer generated animation.
It's sad because The Secret of NIMH 1, I think, has truly stunning animation, and it's just sad to see like the cheapness of a direct-to-video film, for a sequel to that, which it doesn't need a sequel, but it's just, yeah, it's pretty shameful to think about. But yeah, I mean, anything else about the film that we forgot to talk about? Because
Favorite?
well, yeah, I mean, besides favorite moments, but if not, then we can do favorite moments.
Oh, no.
Tammy, start us off with your favorite scene or moment.
Well, my favorite character though is Jeremy. I like him. He's so funny, and and you want to feel sorry for him, but he tries to be so helpful.
And he is
'Cause I-
helpful in his own way.
I think one of my favorite scenes is when he first met Miss Brisby, and he's all tangled in that string,
Mhm.
and he's trying to get untangled and trying to act like, oh, he was just doing this and doing that. He's not really tangled up or anything. And
Mhm.
she's sitting there trying to help him without letting him know she's helping him.
Mhm.
So that one I liked, and I liked it when she met the owl, because I really liked that whole scene with the owl. I like his place and how dark it was and how mysterious, and that whole thing with the owl was one of my favorites.
Yeah, that owl scene has a lot of power and mystique to it.
Yeah.
And Mo obviously already said his favorites. Forrest, favorite character, scene, moment, anything like that?
Oh, favorites probably the Great Owl. As far as characters, the scene would probably be with, oh god, what was it? I'm trying to think of a scene. I think it's when they're on the machine.
On the
And
machine?
yeah.
Which machine?
Oh god, I think it was like a farm. It was like some.
Oh, you mean the tractor? Yes.
Yes.
I wasn't sure if you meant that or you meant like the pulley system that they had to lift your house, because that's a machine
That
too.
too, actually. Both of them.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good, the tractor scene there. That's a good shout out there. Brandon?
For me, it's the scene where she goes into the rose bush, seeing all the intricacy that was laid out. I mean, all the planning that went into that, just the cool, like, creepiness of it, from the little clearing where he's attacked by Brutus, or the elevator, which is made of an old lamplight, going down into the water and having it all drain out. It's just, I love the whole scene. Whenever I watch the movie, I might not have 100% attention on it, but when I get to that scene, I'm always like, I stop whatever I'm doing just to watch it again.
Oh yeah, a lot of good thinking through of how the world works and that sort of thing. What about you, Jake?
It's kind of harder, I guess, since I probably don't have as clear a memory of the film as most of the people here. It's a little harder to say which ones are like clear favorites. As far as characters go, I probably will go with Brisby herself as probably my favorite character. As far as scenes, there's a couple, like the part where she meets Nicodemus in his lair is pretty cool. Kind of what Brandon was saying, like some of the visuals caught me in that scene. For some reason, the scene where she's trapped in the cage and has to get out, for some reason, I just thought that was pretty cool the way it was done.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe one of the particular scenes with Jeremy where where she sends him off to collect string and he's like bonking his head on the rocks because he's trying to do this sneaky, stealthy underwater thing.
Yeah, that's funny.
That kind of amused me. Like little moments like that. And nothing really leaps to the front. Like,
What about you, Dave?
Favorite character is definitely the owl. That whole scene is just so magnificent. I mean, the whole lair, the way he makes an entrance and all that jazz. But a scene that amused me the most was Jeremy when he was tied up by by Auntie Shrew, and he was making all his stuttering and saying but you know, but the way that she was all like take charge in the moment and whatnot, and that scene kind of amused me. But my favorite scene, I would have to say my favorite scenes are when they're actually going through the catacombs in that boat, and you see the way it looks like underneath, like the house underneath the rose bush, and anything dealing with that, per se, because I like seeing underground stuff for some reason in animation, and that was cool.
Oh yeah, definitely. Favorite character for me is probably either Nicodemus or the Great Owl, just because their looks are so distinct, and no other characters in animation look like that. And the fact that they do, it really tells us that there's something special about both of them. And indeed, there are a lot of special things about both of them. But the visuals really show that off. And they both live in their own kind of mystical, magical realms. So, and then scenes probably. I mean, I think the Great Owl scene, it just has a lot of build up, a lot of tension, a lot of majesty to it. I would also like to shout out that the actual sung instance of the Flying Dreams song when she's just feeding Timmy the tea or whatever with the medicine. Something about that really kind of brings it all home, because that's ultimately what people are fighting for. Yeah, or that's ultimately what Mrs. Brisby's fighting for, is that sense of family. And there's something about it that's really warm and loving, but also there's a sense of potential loss in the air, which of course is thankfully turned into a triumphant theme in the climax. So it's a good way to set us up for what's going to come later. But yeah, it's just an amazing film. Highly, highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it or heard of it. Pretty easy to find too, because it's on YouTube right now, streaming for free, and it's been included on Prime pretty often, and just deserves a better Blu-ray release. So definitely check it out, though.
One thing of note before we
Yeah.
I did notice that the hero Justin of the story,
Yes.
he did not end up with Mrs. Brisby in the end.
No, they were giving each other flirty eyes a little bit, but that didn't really
Indeed.
go anywhere, which, probably just as well, because he needs to lead the rat.
Right.
She's gotta
Right.
tend to her family. It's like, they have different life trajectories, so it makes sense.
One other random thing, if it was brought up, my apologies. I don't think. Did anyone mention the little bit about how she's not actually supposed to be called Brisby?
What do you mean?
Frisbee.
Well,
She was called Frisbee in the books.
She was called Frisbee in the books.
Oh, yeah.
And they
Yeah.
were afraid of being, I guess, a copyright suit or some such
Yeah.
thing.
Well, because of
And
the Frisbee company, yeah.
right. But one crazy thing is that apparently they actually went back and redubbed all the dialogue. Rather than having the actors come back, they actually edited the dialogue to change it to Brisby. And I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. That's kind of unfortunate that they felt like they had to do that.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if the Frisbee people really would have been that.
I don't know. It's
Yeah.
possible, but
Yeah.
it's not spelled the same though.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's one of those things as we are a litigious society, and
Yeah.
That we are. But no, I think it's again one of the best Western animated films not put out by Disney. So it's definitely worth checking out for those who haven't.
Bluth
Right.
himself really did put Disney in hot water and Disney took notice of Bluth's talents.
Well, yeah, he was beating them at their own game in probably their worst decade, which was the 80s.
Right.
So this is the kind of thing.
He was probably one of their star animators, and something just didn't sit right with him.
But yeah,
Well,
that's the secret of NIMH, folks.
Alrighty. So, shall we do our outros then?
Sure.
Go for it.
Okay. Let's start with you, Dane. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I am Dane Kyle. I have a channel called Dangerous Arts, DANEJUROUS, where this last October I did a series called Oztober, where I talked about 31 different Oz-related film and TV adaptations, and I'm working on April in Wonderland, which will debut in April of this year. Hard to believe. And other than that, I've made short films and contributed to other feature anthologies, stuff like that. And April in Wonderland will have some more filmmaking elements that'll be introduced into it, as well as reviews. So definitely stay tuned for that.
Alrighty. Let's go over to you, Forrest. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right, my name's Forrest Bennett. I'm an independent film producer and actor based in Long Island, New York. I recently played the Toxic Avenger in a promo for Trauma Entertainment, and you can also see me on another channel called Under the Radar, where we regularly review and discuss movies. We've got we just recently did a review on Ghostbusters Afterlife. We have reviews of Spider-Man No Way Home and Hawkeye out now too, as well as we also have a 30th anniversary commentary on Hook coming up, which one of the Lost Boys from that movie is joining us for, and I always have something going on the pipeline.
Very cool. And you had a new video on your YouTube channel come out.
Yep, some video. It was just a quick shameless plug of everything of every project I've been in, of almost every project I've been involved with lately.
Awesome.
All right.
So let's go over to you, Tammy, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Basically, I collect movies and watch them and collect music. Dave's fiance, and I just enjoy talking about the movies with everybody and learning more things about them. And because everybody else is a little bit more into things as doing their own things and producing and everything, I try and listen to what they say and maybe watch for some of these things in the movies that I hadn't before. So it makes the discussions fun for me.
Very cool. Heading over to you, Jake. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Very good. My name's Jake. I am the co-host of the channel SeptumSin versus the World. I am a movie fan and collector here in Central Virginia. I do like as well to try to be involved when possible with the actually getting involved in them. And I've got a couple of projects in the pipeline that I put a little bit of Kickstarter funding towards. So, that's something. And meanwhile, I do spend a good deal of time viewing, but a lot of it is focused on this channel and SeptumSin versus between a very full house of people and trying to build my native plant nursery. I don't get to view as much as I'd like, but have hit a few fun things in theaters lately, so that's pretty fun. And I guess that's about it for me tonight. It was kind of interesting after a couple of weeks of covering classics where other people were the odd one out. It was kind of interesting being the odd one out for a childhood classic for many. So it was good times.
Were you really that odd out? I mean, it didn't. I mean, I don't know. Didn't seem like I didn't see anybody doing the Jerry Springer throwing the chair across the room or anything like that. So
Well, I know
Oh no,
Tammy.
we're saving
was
that
her
for the
first.
after party.
yeah,
this.
that's
I,
true.
I know this had been her first time seeing it, which was kind of a surprise for me when I asked her
Ah,
earlier, and she'd never seen it, and I was like, "But you've seen All Dogs Go to Heaven and Land Before Time," but
right.
in
And
any case,
we'll have to hit some more of those eventually. Those are all some fun movies.
All
Yeah.
classics in their own right.
oh yeah. Going over to you, Brandon. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, first, Mo had asked if I would plug his channel there, which is the Retro Cult Home Video. I don't know why I have such a hard time remembering the name. But Retro Cult Home Video, which is the home to a lot of media related stuff. But of course, what many of y'all would love out of that is that full moon madness. And he's doing a lot of cool pickup stuff right now. But also, he is going through some of their Grindhouse catalog at the moment. Very cool stuff. Very much worth checking out if you have a chance. Now, for me, I'm SeptumSin, a SeptumSin versus the World. We are a media channel. We like physical media. We do pickup videos. We do reviews. I have finished one, and if the okay, let's see here.
Sorry.
Yep, and it looks like yes, I had run it by the director of the film to make sure that I didn't overstep my bounds. But I'm starting a whole new series of reviews. I call them film psychoanalysis, where I take a look at these films and I analyze it bit for bit after I do a brief review at the beginning. And we're going to be starting with Dante's Shadow of Sin, which is the Dakota Ray film that had come out last year. I'm going to hopefully have that out next week. But and we also have anime discussions at the end of the month. But of course, if you hadn't seen it, you should check out our Gregory Horror Show feature because it was a lot of fun. And our Bad Ben episode is coming out at the very end of the month. Last Friday of every month, we are going to be doing a Bad Ben series. We're covering all the movies. We've got a main cast. How willing Jake is as a main cast member is yet to be seen, but we are definitely moving in that direction. And I'll be back for the next week thing.
Alrighty, and my name is David Strege. I'm one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. So thank you for joining us on this pleasurable journey down classic lane. I mean, this is like part of my extensive childhood that we're going through. So it's nostalgic as all hell. But I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where we also podcast under that title. But I also do reviews for that channel, and I just recently put 2 reviews out that I've been meaning to put out for several years now, but finally got to it. It's just films get to my backlog and I get busy. So but also this next week we because Sidney Poitier has died, or is past, RIP, we are going to be watching a film this weekend with Boris, and we're going to be covering the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
Oh, very good.
So if any of you want to join us, you're more than welcome to. I'll put up a link if you do. But I think Brandon is going with his Bad Ben series, so I think that will contradict some of y'all. But that's okay. We will be. I just wanted to cover something in his honor, and hopefully the audience enjoys the discussion of it. And I'll definitely have some more reviews coming in the coming weeks. I know I have a big video pickup that I plan on putting on the channel, so look out for that. That's coming. So thank you so much. Now I'll bring it back to Brandon so he can tell us about the next movie that might accidentally scare you.
Brandon, before you talk, I keep forgetting. I actually have contributed. I keep forgetting to tell you guys. Have you ever heard of Lucas the Spider? I have Lucas the Spider and Finley, and it was something like you had to contribute, like with the movies. But I have Lucas the Spider and Finley. So if you've ever heard of that or seen the Lucas the Spider on YouTube, I have contributed to something.
Very good.
Alrighty. So Brandon, tell us what movie that might scare the audience next week. You are muted, Brandon.
Yeah.
Oh, brief course correction. Bad Ben will be a monthly series, not more than once in that. That'd be hard for us to get that through. But as far as next, it'll be our last because we have a birthday at the end of this month that we're going to be celebrating. So we're going to do one more for Accidentally Scary as we cover the film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which is very very fun. It has a late great late great of many actors and actresses in that one. But with that, back to you, Dave.
Alrighty. So thank you for visiting us here tonight. Hopefully we've brought to you a fairly decent discussion for you. and continue to do so. And next week, as we have said, we'll definitely be going down different avenues. So thank you.
A
and
world
have a
of pure imagination.
thank you, and have a great evening, morning, wherever you are. Appreciate and let us know down in the comments what you thought of the film while growing up or as an adult. So, thank you.
Night.
All right, everyone.